Welcome back to These Things Are Written on this Friday. Glad that you are joining me as we continue with Micah chapter 2, beginning with verse 6. Remember that so far, Micah in chapter 2 is prophesying against them, not necessarily because of the sins against the Lord, but because of their sins against others. Chapter 1 focused on their sins against God. Chapter 2 is focusing on sins against one another. We begin, or continue, I should say, with verse 6. Do not preach, thus they preach. One should not preach of such things. Disgrace will not overtake us. As we look at this, we understand who the they is. The they are false prophets. What they do not want to preach, Micah to preach about, is the judgment that is coming upon Jerusalem and upon Judah. They want to preach that everything is good, that things are right, that nothing bad will come upon the people. Why? Because then the people are happy. They are speaking things which the people want to hear, but not the word of God. Micah is preaching the word of God. Let's continue with verse 7. Should this be said, O house of Jacob? Has the Lord grown impatient? Are these his deeds? Do not my words do good to him who walk uprightly? The false prophets, the one who were speaking the words in the quotes in verse 6, are really saying that God would not judge Jerusalem. That's one of the thoughts that we get from chapter 1, that God wouldn't do this. And has he really grown this impatient that it would happen, that these are his deeds? And by the way, aren't God's words, don't they do good to those who walk uprightly, and only good? Kind of the theology of glory, which says that good, almost that good things happen to those who do good. That bad things will not come to those who do bad, but look at what the cross is. The cross is a sign of suffering. That bad does come to those who are good. In this world, Jesus says, we will have trouble, but he has overcome this world. So as we look at this, we see the false prophets speaking against the word, and Micah, in this part, questioning those on what they say and if it is really true. Let's continue with verse 8. But lately my people have risen up as an enemy. You stripped the rich robe from those who pass by trustingly with no thought of war. Again, my word in verse 7, now my people in verse 8. My people, his people, God's people that he has chosen have risen up as an enemy, opposed to what God calls. And how do they do this? You strip the rich robe from those who pass by trustingly, those who pass by unexpectedly, who feel safe, but yet you rob them. Continue with verse 9. The women of my people you drive out from their delightful houses. From their young children you take away my splendor forever. Again, two of those times that my is mentioned at the beginning, my people, and my splendor at the very end. Now, some have said that this is speaking against the oppression of the widows and the orphans because of how it's worded. But it could also, most likely, it is about the women and children are the innocent, and they are driven out with the men from their houses, kind of going back to the first part of chapter 2, which is against those who take the land from others, who in a way that only seems right, you could say. Verse 10, arise and go, for this is no place to rest, because of the uncleanness that destroys with a grievous destruction. Verse 11 is really a very sarcastic verse. It says, if a man should go about and utter wind and lies, saying, I will preach to you of wine and strong drink, He would be the preacher for this people. In other words, the people want to hear those good things, right? The preacher wants to hear, or the people want to hear the preacher who talks about celebrations of these good times that are happening, only good and not of the destruction. He calls it utter wind and lies of only preach the good and not the bad that comes about because of sin. Verses 12 and 13 are really a new section as we continue on this. It kind of stands out because we've seen a lot of judgment, and here is some words of hope. Verse 12. Surely I will assemble all of you, O Jacob. I will gather the remnant of Israel. I will set them together like sheep in a fold, like a flock in its pasture, a noisy multitude of men. And one of the things that we need to try to figure out is, what is he talking about? Is he talking about the return from exile, or is he talking about the coming of Christ? The answer is yes, both. The return of Judah from exile in Babylon hundreds of years later, but more importantly, the one who would come, the Messiah who would come, who would be like a shepherd to the people, the one who will gather all of people to himself by faith. So the first analogy that he gives of this Messiah is one of a shepherd, the good shepherd. Verse 13, we find another analogy. He who opens the breach goes up before them. They break through and pass the gate, going out by it. Their king passes on before them, the Lord at their head. Their king is the one who goes out and conquers, the king being the Messiah, the Lord. An interesting analogy, an interesting little bit of hope, pointing the people forward to the destruction that is coming, but yet the hope that God would bring in the restoration, first from exile, and then through Christ. God bless. Have a great weekend, and I hope to see you in worship.